Okay, I think we're live. Hello. Let's see here. Okay, so this might be live. I only just realized that I set this to be at for 11 a.m. I thought it was supposed to be at 1 p.m. But yeah, I'm good at setting up YouTube live streams, as everyone can tell um, from my wonderful adventures on Consciousness Live. So, not that anyone cares, but just while I'm hanging out here, the reason why there's been these misadventures is because I used to use Zoom, and I would connect the Zoom to the stream key on YouTube and sort of stream it from Zoom to YouTube. I guess if that is how it works, I don't know, but they would connect directly. But then, anyway, for reasons, that stopped working, and I started using OBS. So then I have OBS and I have the Zoom call, and I take OBS and connect that to YouTube. And that's where a lot of the problems that I've been having have come from, is me trying to figure out like how to work exactly the OBS to YouTube connection. Okay, so anyway, I'm here live. These are kind of, like I said, office hours. So, usually what I do during office hours is I wait for people to come talk to me. And if nobody does, then I just do other things until someone does. Um, so that's kind of what I'm doing. Of course, today there's a lot going on. What's how is Tom McDonald and Ben Shapiro have a rap song? Do you guys know about this? Tom McDonald and Ben Shapiro. Then there's a diss song that came out aimed at Tom McDonald. I guess Ben Shapiro never gets mentioned. It must not be about that, but from this upchurch character, holy moly, there's a lot going on out there. Not to mention Megan Thee Stallion, Nicki Minaj. Do you think Megan's going to respond? I don't know. What's all this drama going on? Then there's a Benzino diss. Have you guys heard Rap Elvis? um, I never knew who Benzino was until Eminem started dissing him. Anyway, so there's a lot going on uh, out there in the world. Meanwhile, I've been watching David Lewis videos and thinking about neutral monism. So that's all very exciting and a lot of fun. Let's see here. Okay, so what do you guys have a side? Anyone pick a side on this? Nikki versus Megan. We got any barbs in the audience? I was gonna sit here and start amusing myself until someone. So it gives me something better to do. So should we see what's going on? Um, on YouTube over here. So hold on. Okay. Oops. You guys can't see that. Okay, good. Alrighty then. So, one thing I've been seeing kind of play out. This is kind of not directly related to anything here or there, but um, I get to do what I want on my live streams. I guess I never had this such freedom before. Until someone comes to chat, I guess. I do have a Zoom thing. I guess I could share the link if anyone wants to. Um, how do you do that? So one thing I think that's interesting, um, which there's been some discussion of, but it hasn't been too much discussion, is this. But this notion from Daniel Dennett of counterfeit people. Um, so I think that's pretty interesting. The idea that, well, I mean, I guess as I would put Dennett's idea that the Turing test, as we standardly have developed it, is based on deception, as he would put it. I think you could argue that, but anyway, that's the way he puts it. So what you try to do is get the machine to trick you into thinking that it's a person, and that's a dangerous thing to do. If you build machines that can trick humans and making us think that they're persons, then that's a dangerous thing to do. And it's, in his opinion, one of the more dangerous consequences of AI, that we're not going to know, or it's going to devalue interactions because we're not going to know if we're dealing with a person or not. One way that I saw this play out kind of recently was when this this Kanye West, I guess it wasn't even a record of his, it was like a feature of Kanye, allegedly. This is what all the confusion is about. Kanye was allegedly featured on this like drill rapper, who people were like, how do they even know each other? Anyway, so he had this whole verse, and people were saying it was good for Kanye. Other people were saying, well, did he write it or not? But it could have been AI in the sense of an AI voice changer, not in the sense of an AI machine doing the actual delivery of the rapping, but it could have been some like real rapper, real actual person. I mean, rapping and then using AI to voice modulate their voice to sound like Kanye, which you can do. And there's a hilarious song with Trump rapping with his mugshot first day out, looks like he got out of jail. It's hilarious. It sounds like Trump. So anyway, the point though is that so people were debating, like, is this really Kanye or not, or is this a person using this AI voice changing software? And people were like, it sounds, he's talking about things that happened to him, or it's not really him, it's too well written. And it does kind of put you into this undermined state where you're like, I don't really know if like what I'm listening to is even the person anymore. So, of course, as a professor, you get the kind of the same feeling when you're reading like a paper or something. You're like, did ChatGPT write this paper? Is this a person I'm reading or not? So I do feel like that Dennett is onto something there. This is something that's going to, way before, well, who knows way before, but probably before there are conscious machines, we're going to have widespread issues like this. So, cool. But I'll stop rambling about AI and hip hop, as I see people are. By the way, if some people are here, if you want to, join the Zoom and talk to me, not by typing, but by talking, you don't have to turn your camera on. I don't care if you do that, but or not. You can stay in the chat. I don't care. But Victor, Victor, I saw that you made a comment earlier asking me to look at something about radical and embodied cognition. So I'm going to. I'll do that. I'll react to that. And I am interested in that stuff. I come from kind of the side of representationalism, obviously. Maybe not obviously, but like I was studied with Ruth with Millikan, and my higher order representation of a representation stuff about consciousness is obviously neck deep in representation. So, and I've talked to some inactive people for Consciousness Live, and I'm interested in that stuff. And like I know Regan's work a little bit. I think the last thing I know from him was this book. What was that book? Why does red not sound like a bell or something? Was that this book or is that a paper? Anyway, so, and he did write a book recently. Yes. What was the name of that book? Oh, I read it recently too. Reread it, but anyway, okay, no one cares. The point though is I'm interested in that stuff. I know a little bit about it. I'm not super expert in it, but I end up wondering like how radical it is. So every time I really dive into the details, it ends up convincing me that it's not as radical as it sounds. Like embodied cognition. And in the sense in which you do finally come to understand it, it's not only not radical, but it's kind of like, sort of just regular. Like you wonder who they're arguing against at a certain point. Although that's not always true, because if someone's like really into like Gibson and talks about affordances and the environment, I don't know. So there are some things there that are interesting. So I guess I'd say, yeah, I'm somewhat confused by the to what extent they think they're offering a competing model to the representationalist generally, and to what extent the competing model is explaining the same thing, or competing for the same explanatory target. Which is why when I saw your comment from earlier, Victor, that I thought, yes, this is something I should look into, because this is somewhere that I'm like, I could use education. Let's put it that way. So, I don't know what the second part of your question. Are representational such as are those outdated? I would say no. I would say no, huh? Why are they outdated? I think Millikan and teleosemantics, Burge, his theory of perceptual content is what I take it that you're talking about. Are they outdated? Interesting and provocative way to put it. So let me look into that. I'll put that on the queue of things to check out. I have a couple of things on the list, but this is a cool next thing to check out, and to think of people to invite on to talk to. By the way, for those who may or may not know, this podcast that I do, Consciousness Live, I tend to try to find people who I don't agree with to talk with, not to argue with or have a debate with, but to try to figure out like why they think the things they do, to convince me. But so I'm interested in finding out about views that are different than my own. And I do often change my mind about things in various ways. So that's cool, one might think. So, hi, Pooja. Do I think zombies and shombies are equally conceivable? Yes, I do. So, it depends on what you mean a little bit by that stuff. So, for any given individual person, I doubt very much that they're both equally conceivable. Like, could David Chalmers conceive of a Shombi? A Shombi being just a physical duplicate of me that is conscious, but with nothing that's not physical, just only physical stuff. By the way, to conceive of that, you don't have to do anything fancy. I ramble about that all the time, but you just have to conceive of one possible world where there is the physics of our world and nothing else. And also something identical to me with consciousness. Okay, so, or as I like to put it, that you have a PT and Q. So instead of P and not Q, as the zombies say, you have PT, which is the physics and that's all, and then Q, which is that there's a conscious being. Okay, so I don't think that for David Chalmers they're equally conceivable, and maybe not for me, because when I work myself up into this frenzy, I do sort of lose my grip on what zombies are, how we're really supposed to picture the things that they're talking about, or conceive of them in a coherent way. But on other days, I'm like, I can kind of grasp it. And I remember days when it seemed clearer to me, like before I started thinking about all this stuff too much. And then for other people, like Ned Block, I think they are both equally conceivable, because Ned is someone who thinks that possibility and conceivability are not linked, so that he's perfectly happy saying you can conceive of things which entail contradictory stuff, not jointly maybe, but separately, like that consciousness is at this world where there's only physics, and that there's also, it's lacking at this other world where there's only our physics. So yeah, that seems like contradictory, but that doesn't mean anything for, according to Bloch, that our world could be that way. So in one sense, when you talk about is something conceivable or not conceivable, I think you have to talk about to a person. And my own sort of view is that what you find conceivable or not sort of reflects your own background assumptions. And I think that this is often expressed by physicalists when they say things like that the zombie argument is question begging, or that you would have to assume dualism. That yes, but I see someone ask about CUNY. R. Brown at CUNY. Dot LaGuardia.edu or something, or one more Brown at Gmail. Those are both going to me. But oh, thank you. Ooh, what is this? Are you getting a special delivery of coffee? Thank you, babe. Matcha. Ooh, cool. Okay. Anyway, when you're live, you're live. So. In a sense, what I was saying was that when you find something conceivable, it's diagnostic of you, like what you think, what you personally assume. So if you sort of are assuming that consciousness is not physical, then you're going to find zombies to be conceivable. Or if you think possibility is not linked to this other stuff, then you're probably going to be it's fine. So I guess I would say people try to get around this. I see other people asking questions, which I want to talk about, but just to sort of finish this. When you people try to get around this by talking about ideal conceivability. Like, we're not talking about so they try to distinguish between what they call prima facie and ideal conceivability. So prima facie conceivability is supposed to be conceivable at first glance, it could be revised, or it seems that way sort of to the reasonable person before bedtime, or whatever that old expression was. That wasn't an objection that wouldn't occur to a reasonable person, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So then they would argue it's ideal conceivability that matters, and these things about it seeming to me but not to you that this is the case kind of fall away. But there's where I say it's not clear that you get to do that, because that sounds like the question begging part. So if someone says to me that no, it's really zombies that are ideally conceivable but not zombies, then I want to know, then why does it seem to me like that the other way? And either I'm happy being, I'm just totally bad at this, and these people are smarter than me, and I'm missing something completely, totally obvious. But then when you ask them, these other people, so which thing is the contradictory thing that makes it like the thing that I'm saying can't be the case? And what they say is, well, zombies, conceivability, this is idea, and it just goes around in a circle. So that you can't ever, or at least it hasn't been to this day, ever been shown, that there is some incoherency or contradictory thing which is entailed by physicalism. And I don't think you get to say that it's zombies that show that, because then how come zombies don't show that dualism is contradictory? And it can't just be because they thought of it first, because actually that's not, historically maybe even accurate. But anyway, okay. So that's a long-winded way of saying that at the end of time, I think that one of these will be crystal clear inconceivable, and the other one will be crystal clear conceivable. And that's what I mean. So when I talk about deprioritizing the a priori arguments, my laboriously named paper, That's what I mean. It's like, okay, so even if you're a rationalist and you think you can do all this stuff, like we're not there yet. Like this may be something you could know a priori if all the science was in, but we aren't. And you had all the facts about consciousness from the inside, which we don't. So that by the time we're able to know whether it's a priori true or not, we'll have already known it empirically. And my analogy is with water and H2O. So I think it is knowable a priori by an ideal reasoner that water is H2O. I'm happy to grant that on certain days, like today. So that's fine. If you knew all the physical facts, you could deduce that there was water around, I would say. Great. But we still, us human beings, still, no matter that, learn this empirically by doing science. And so now that we have all of the theories in hand, we can kind of see how you could a priori deduce it from the physical facts. But they couldn't before they did all the empirical work that led to those theories. So by the time it was knowable a priori that water was H2O, by the time that was knowable in that way, it had already been known empirically. And that's my real ultimate view about consciousness is that or my hope, or that's what I would like to have to be the case, is that something like that will be true with consciousness. Is that, yeah, you could know this stuff a priori, so it's not bad to talk about zombies and arguments of this nature. It's just that we can't know it now, and these intuitions now reveal more about the intuitor than they do about the nature of reality. So maybe that was more information than you wanted about that, but that I have thought about this a lot, so that's my view on that. And how it relates to the knowledge argument. I have, in my view, parodies of all these arguments. So I think that you have the Shombies, physical duplicates with consciousness. Then I even talked about the Zombies. The Zombies are non-physical duplicates of me, but no consciousness. So I thought that was perfectly conceivable. Then I was annoyed that the movie came out called Zombies, and it was about a zoo animal zombie epidemic, and I was like, no, that's not what zombies are. But anyway, so you can see what they did. Zoo and zom. Pretty obvious. Okay, anyway, I'm still mad about that. But zombies, you can imagine Descartes' version of the non-physical mind having only cognitive states, doing math, and then Platonic heaven, but no consciousness, I would say. So, doesn't that show that consciousness is not non-physical? But then also I had this business about the knowledge argument, which I sort of thought that you could do a reverse argument on that as well, whereby you sort of imagine, instead of Mary in her black and white room, you imagine somebody else. I forget who. You always got to name it some M name nowadays because of one Mary paper 500 billion years ago. But anyway, I think it was, I forget what my catchy name was, but who cares? Whoever it is. Imagine them raised not in a black and white room, but in a room where they knew all the physical facts, but in a room where they only studied phenomenology. And they always practiced what Husserl called bracketing, which is this business whereby you look at the external world, but you don't think about it as the external world. You think about it as your experience of the external world. So here I am, here's this cup of coffee, and usually I'm thinking about that, but instead I can think about my experience of the cup of coffee. I can bracket the fact that it's real or something like that, and just think about how it's presented to me, or like how I think about it, like how I would draw it from this angle if I had to. So someone who was just trained to think phenomenologically never knew anything about the brain. I mean, this was partially inspired by my own mother, who, when we started studying the neuroscience, and I was telling her about neurons, she was like horrified. She told me that night that she had a nightmare about these little things inside her head, these neurons. And I was like, what the fuck? These aren't, that's what, they've always been there, and that they are you. Anyway, according to me. But still, Martha or whoever doesn't know about the brain in any way at all. All she knows about is experience, because that's how she was raised. Uh, and to focus, not to even think about the physical world as being physical. She's taught from a very early age that it's just experience, experience, experience. She might have even been raised, and now that I think about it, she could have been raised as an idealist. Like, so to really think of everything as mental and to study it not as a physical thing, but as a mental thing, her experience of it, so to speak. So you imagine Marta then learning about the brain. Well, to me, it just seems obvious that she's gonna like instantly go, oh, this is how you connect the two, so that she will have. She will know instantly from her knowledge of her own experience which states are the red ones and which ones are the physical states, that is. She'll be able to deduce them. So I don't know how convincing you find that. I found it pretty convincing. About as convincing as a knowledge argument, I would say. But I think that the way that they're connected is that they both depend on this. The knowledge argument brings in all kinds of irrelevant stuff. In my opinion, it's so annoying that people talk about it because it's all about knowledge, and knowledge is caca, to quote my favorite gremlin. But okay, but really the key is this a priori entailment relation. Could Mary from in her room deduce what it's like, or know what it's like? Can we deduce what it's like, or could there be zombies? So I do think they are related there. But so I think my version of the reverse knowledge argument suggests that you can make these kinds of deductions. You can imagine even, did I have this as a version of the Flying Man? I forget if I had Marta falling through the air. Maybe she only had experience and focused only on that instead of having any physical contact, sort of. Anyway, okay. So a lot hinges on whether you think these a priori entailments are there. So I think that this casts doubt on that. Or at least reveals that different people will think differently about this, and that it's not so obvious that because there are people who agree with you, that there aren't people who agree with me. And can we test this conceivability or inconceivability? Yeah, in the indirect sense that I sort of mentioned in the water H2O case, that, there were people who thought, like, I've harp on this a lot, but it's because it's true. Go back and read John Locke when he talks about gold, and what he says is, like, even if we knew everything there was to know about the microphysical structure of gold, we could never understand why it has these properties and not any other properties. Now we sort of think we can. So the same with the water and H2O case. What was conceivable, or what seemed inconceivable, that water has parts, according to Aristotle, became conceivable and actually true in a way. So once the science comes in, it sort of reveals like what really is and isn't the case. Like, so, take light. It's electromagnetic radiation. That's great. It's wonderful. So can you conceive of experience like mine without there being any light around? Like right now there's this annoying light coming in from over there, bouncing off the hardwood floor and blinding the crap out of me. So could I have an experience like that, but in a world where there was no light, like in a world where there's no electromagnetic radiation? Well, if you buy the kind of kryptonite, yes, I could. It could have been produced by heat. This very kind of experience could have been produced by some other physical thing in the environment. And so, but is that to imagine a case where, light is something other than an electromagnetic radiation? Is it, in that case, kinetic energy of particles? And Kripke's answer, and I would agree, is the answer is no. light is electromagnetic radiation. We pick it out in a certain way, but what we picked out is now a thing which is necessarily, we know is necessarily true. So in that other world, it's not light that's producing my experience, even though it's, it's like this. It's some other physical phenomena. So I do think in these ways, in the kind of standard Kripkean way, we can come to learn from experience through experimentation and science that the world is a certain way, and then that can alter these other things. So, oh, that's delightful. Okay, so cool. Um, yeah, so Victor saying something representationalism as something like Cartesian dualism. Yeah, I know. I don't understand that critique, but I'm going to look into this. So, by the way, I put the link to the Zoom. So if anyone wants to talk to me voicely, is that an adjective? Go ahead. So Stephen says, I'm curious what you think philosophical knowledge is, but also what you think our methodology ought to be, or at least what method do you use in order to acquire philosophical knowledge? It's something partly touched on in discussion with Eric, but also something some philosophers of mind have been discussing lately, like Chalmers, Stoljar, and Chudoff. Oh, interesting. Um, yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, you're going to out me as an anti-epistemologist, which I guess is fine. But I am an anti-epistemologist. I don't like knowledge. I actually don't really think knowledge is all that important. In fact, I think that what's important is true beliefs. Even if those true beliefs are acquired accidentally, and so therefore someone might say, well, they don't count as knowledge. If they're true and you act on them, then that's what matters. So I don't really, to be honest, like 100% honest, I often don't really see what the business about knowledge is supposed to add beyond that it is true and that I can kind of tell you, give you some reason for why I think it's true. Um, so, yeah. And then how important is the me being able to tell you the reason as opposed to it being true? So I don't, but except for phenomenal knowledge when it comes to consciousness and knowing what it's like there, I sort of say, okay, I know what we're talking about. But this other stuff, I don't really know often what we're talking about. So is there philosophical knowledge? Like, do we know that a certain theory of semantics is true, or that certain philosophy, philosophical approach or view is, do we know it as opposed to like other people? See, I have trouble with that. Whole kind of a concept, like what would it mean to have philosophical knowledge? I mean, my own kind of view about this is that the job of philosophy, generally speaking, there's kind of a professional and a personal, but the personal one is the most obvious. It's the Socratic one of know thyself, which sounds kind of sort of, lame to say, but I think it's true, that the most important job for philosophy is examining one's own beliefs and asking oneself, why do one hold them, and knowing oneself in that way, I think is very important. However, as far as professional field, I think philosophy has the role of mapping out the conceptual space and argumentative structure of that space, whereby what the various possibilities are and the way that you can get between them using arguments. So that if you start from here in this combination of views, can you go there? Like, for example, in metaethics, which is what I wrote my dissertation on and where I was very interested in and have views on and all that stuff. But, many people sort of thought that there's a package of views about whether you think these things are objectively true or false, and whether you think they involve states like emotion or belief. So people thought they go together or they come apart together. Like there's no separating those. And gradually people came to kind of see actually they come apart. You can kind of mix and match these various views. And to me that counts as, so you could have an emotive theory that says there's no semantic content to the statement X is wrong, but there is a justificatory story you could tell about why X is wrong, even though the statement is not truth valuable. Maybe the thing that you say may be more like boo or yay, but nonetheless it may be appropriate to boo or yay, or various other moves that can be made. For example, it's not appropriate to do that at a funeral, but it is at a sporting event. Understanding why it might be important. Okay, anyway, this is what I think advancing philosophical knowledge, if there is such a thing, would constitute, is that understanding that, well, no, actually, if you have this view, like you think emotivism is true about the semantics of language, that's separate from the view of how it's justified, and that you could start from there and go in a different direction and end up with a different package of views, which people previously hadn't seen. To me, that counts as progress. Even if, we don't know which way we should go. I would say in mathematics, a lot of knowledge is that way as well. A lot of mathematical knowledge is conditional, because conditional proof is a standard mathematical technique whereby you say something like, if X, then something else follows, and then you prove that conditional statement. But we don't know if X. But if X, we know something, a whole bunch of stuff. So I think that's, in philosophy, you sort of get that kind of, if it were all said and done, that would be a different story. But currently we're working towards trying to understand, if you start here, then where do you go? And can you make a choice by here or there? And are you boxed in? Is this something that you can, another example is like the problem of evil and God's existence, and whether a perfect being would allow that. And so people have made various moves there to expand what the options are. And that to me counts as progress. But does that count as knowledge? In a way, yeah, but not knowledge of like knowing which one is correct. I don't think we're there yet. That's partially why I really don't like all this kind of rhetoric when people say, way back when I got into an argument when my blog first started with someone saying, basically a post like this, I won't mention any names, but you could find it if you were diligent enough. But at least on my end, nothing's deleted. But they were saying there's some stuff we already know, like things that are done. And one of those things was like that we know that the causal theory of reference is false. And I was like, huh? So, or that physicalism is false. These other things, I don't think we know this. I mean, I think that means you sincerely are convinced by it. But as far as the methodology of philosophy, I sort of think it's the use of argument. That's the methodology of philosophy. And the method of cases where you kind of use your intuitions to evaluate cases, I think is a good way to look at the concepts that we're using. And conceptual analysis is important and interesting. I don't think it's going to solve any of these issues, but without empirical work. So I sort of think that you need both of them. You need empirical work and conceptual analysis, and they got to work jointly together. But yeah. I'm not sure if I said anything remotely interesting or that addressed what you were trying to say, so feel free to follow up. Have I read Goff's recent book, Why? No, I haven't. It's on a list of stuff to read, though, but I've been reading books for the podcast lately. Right now I'm still reading Steve Fleming's book, Know Thyself, The Science of Metacognition. Neuroscience of Metacognition. What is it? Is it? Uh-oh. You guys are going to... Hold on. What is the name of his book now? The Science of Metacognition. Let's just say that's what the name of the book is. But I haven't finished it all the way through the second time. So, The Science of Self-Awareness. Damn it. That was so close. Okay, so I haven't read Goff's new book, but I sort of know a lot about Goff's work. Not necessarily about this, but you say he gives a version of the P-zombie argument, which is a zombie with raw qualia experience but lacks rational agency or something. Okay, so is this his way of trying to say that rational agency is like something at the bottom that you need as well, like to add to the panpsychist based or whatever? I mean, I do have to say that I have mixed feelings about this stuff because there's a part of me that really admires and respects the work that Philip does, and then there's a part of me that thinks, gee, you can say whatever you want when you're like detached from like science or empirical constraints, and I go back and forth between those. So could there be a zombie that had the experience of red but didn't have any rational agency? If a zombie really means like a duplicate of me, then I'm not really sure. That's possible. If a zombie means like a just a physical creature that lacks that, I don't know. The devil would be in the details, so I'd have to look at the details to really be able to say something about that, to be honest. But why were you asking about that? You think that's good or you think that's bad? Let's see. What do I think about Internalism by Papineau? Yeah, I mean, I talked to David about this on my Consciousness Live podcast, and I like his book, Against Representationalism, and I'm very much open to that kind of approach. You know, on days, I think I've hopefully, you know, as I've said, I don't really have a considered view. I sort of think that you sort of should look at all the views and think that each one is a contender to some degree or other, and you should sort of go, if I were to order them in a certain way, then I would put Mount out in front or these other ones next to each other or whatever in a cluster, but I don't really think you're going to get much more than that. But I definitely am, I think that this kind of internalism is a view that I'm very much sympathetic to. You know, so the intuition behind the view is that representationalism is weird. And yeah, I think he's right. Of course, this view is weird too, that these intrinsic properties or whatever are strange things as well. So I don't think you get out. This is what I enjoyed about it in Eric's work. I don't think you get out of this area without saying something that sounds strange to someone. So this is one of those things. And you can see, you know, that so even he's going to say, look, these things have representational properties, but they themselves are like, they're not representational in and of themselves. They have their own character on his view. I think that is an important view. And pointing out how strange some of the representationalism stuff is, I think, is important. And representationalism is a view that's like not a unitary view, by the way, because there are dualist representationalists. I mean, you know, you got people like Adam Paltz and David Chalmers calling themselves representationalists. And then you have people like Michael Tai and, you know, Fred Dresky calling themselves representationalists. And it's like, these are very different views, guys. So it depends on what you mean by representation and what kind of work it's supposed to do. But I find the intuitiveness of his view, definitely. Of course, you know, the pressure that's put on that is by all these like kind of thought experiments about, you know, inverted earth and weird kinds of creatures that are constituted differently by having the same kind of experience. So it's like none of these is going to escape without some kind of case. And I think that's, if you look at the work of Adam Powitz, this is what he's really good at. One of the things, I mean, he's got a million arguments, but he's really good at concocting strange scenarios whereby any version of a view you can think of is going to be sort of like put under pressure in the strange scenario that he's concocted. So, yeah. What would I say the majority view amongst neuroscience of cognitive science working on consciousness be some version of physicalism? Would I say that the majority view among neuroscientists is a version of physicalism? Yeah, I don't know. I guess what I would say is that, well, neuroscience is a broad category. I mean, there are certainly dualists who are neuroscientists, but the majority view is probably a kind of physicalism. I mean, I teach an introduction to neuroscience class, and the textbook that we use says, that there are limitivists, that neuroscience is, that words like consciousness, attention, and memory are used, but they don't really mean the full psychological terms. So that's pretty straight out there, but is that the dominant view? I would say in a sense it is, and I would say that the reason is pretty straightforward amongst people that don't think too much about consciousness. I mean, you have to sort of think it is interesting because it didn't used to be, but now it is. And you could look back in history and find a time when the dominant view amongst scientists was not physicalism, but some kind of transcendental idealism maybe, or panpsychism even. So, I think David Papineau has some good, interesting work on why physicalism has become more popular. And in his view is that it's precisely because of empirical work advancing to the point where this became a conceptual possibility. Like, I mean, not a conceptual possibility, but more than a conceptual possibility, where it became like, because there were physicalists before that, like Democritus. So if you think there is some non-physical thing, you would expect to find evidence for it in the physical world to some degree or other. I mean, the most straightforward thing you could think of is that you would be looking at some neuron in the brain and it would suddenly start to do something, and you would ask it, like, fire an action potential or release a neurotransmitter, and you would say, why did that happen? And then you would look around for some cause and you would not find it. And then you might think to yourself, well, gee, that doesn't prove that there's no physical thing that we don't know about that causes it. But it certainly would, make you wonder, that seems like grasping at straws. And when you look at, like, neurons, we have a very good story to tell about why they do what they do. They don't just do things. There's a causal mechanism involving ions and channels and gates and pumps and equations that describe them to some degree or another. So, not perfectly. Cool. It looks very like you can take 4 neurons, connect them together, stimulate this one, and predict mathematically how that one that's connected by 2 chains over is going to react, and then you can do stuff like that. So now, all right, look at a simple kind of organism like a crab, and look at how the crab moves, and then look at the motor system that commands it, its claws. That's another classic example, the claw, the pinching mechanism. So that kind of stuff, the sea slug, the gill with tractor. So we have these very simple models where we have all the circuitry kind of mapped and well understood. They're not big models, they're small things, but they work. And so we haven't needed to postulate any extra thing in there yet. And furthermore, we haven't found any spontaneous thing which looks suspiciously like it's not caused by a physical thing. Now that doesn't seal the deal, and that's why I want to watch this Kevin Mitchell and Robert Sapolsky debate, because when Philip talks about this stuff, he always cites Kevin Mitchell as the neuroscientist who convinced him that the brain might not be deterministic. So I think that's interesting, and I want to find out about it. And I understand, I remember back in the old days of my YouTube, this appears not to be working. Am I back? I don't know what's happening here. Anyway, so those are the reasons why I think physicalism is kind of the dominant view, because we have explanations of these things in terms of the mechanisms of neurons, and it hasn't jumped out at us that there's any non-physical thing. And in addition, the few tests that they have done on any parapsychological things haven't come out, very, very well. I think the most famous one, or at least the one that I know the most about, is this study whereby some guy claimed to show that people have a kind of ESP, where ESP is extrasensory perception. So in psychology, the sensation and perception are linked. Sensation is like the stimulation of your sense organs. Perception is an interpretation of that. So could there be perception that was above and beyond what you sense? That's ESP. Okay, so what he tried to show was that people can feel the staring on the back of their head by someone else. And then this would, what was it? Like it would alert them to something, like if they were going to be touched or something, like whether their person was staring or looking at the back of their head had some impact on whether they could anticipate someone touching the back of their head. I might be misremembering that. I forget exactly. Now I even forget what the name of the study is. It BEP? It's something like I should know this stuff if I'm going to bring it up. Anyway, it's a very famous experiment where it kind of caused a stir because he claimed to have shown that there was this effect without seemingly any physical interaction. As far as I know, it was never duplicated, and no one else ever found that effect, which is good reason for thinking that something fishy is going on here. So, extending this outwards towards consciousness, I think, gives many people confidence in this. And then more generally, like amongst the physicalists, they are more specifically functionalists, probably, because they tend to think that's what cognitive science does, is try to find some function and look for a mechanism that performs that function. So what else is there? The brain isn't magic on, many people might think it's just performing certain functions. So, yeah, I think that probably the dominant view is some version of functionalism. Global workspace theory is a version of functionalism, by the way. Many higher order theories are versions of functionalism. I don't think IIT is a version of functionalism. Recurrent processing theory, version of functionalism. So that's what I would say about that. Yes, I do think it is. But there are, many neuroscientists haven't thought carefully about these arguments, which are supposed to convince us of non-physicalism. So if we required that every neuroscientist took a philosophy of mind class, would they all be physicalists? I don't know. Interesting question. Let's see. So Pooja back here saying, yes, the outcome of the knowledge argument for different people is dependent upon their philosophical disposition. Yes. if you're a physicalist, you will suppose, I don't think that's true. So many physicalists think Mary does learn something new, but what they think is that she doesn't learn something new in a way that would threaten physicalism, and then they go on to try to explain in their own, in their view, what that is. So I was just listening to the David Lewis lecture, which I put up on my channel earlier today, and there's another part of it too where I listen to the question and answers that he gives at the end, which is very interesting. But but for Lewis, she does learn something new. She learns how to do something. But what she learns is not a fact according to Lewis. So she has knowledge. How? It's like she learns how to ride a bike according to Lewis, not like she learns, the answer to a question. So many physicalists are happy to admit that. I mean, most physicalists, almost all I don't know of any physicalists, excepting those radical type A physicalists, like possibly Dennett. Like maybe Dennett is the only one, and Pete Mendick, those two. Is there really any, I can't think of anybody else in a published article saying that Mary's not going to learn anything. But Dennett entertains that possibility that she could know already what it's like to see red in her room. But every other physicalist is going to suppose that Mary does learn something new, but that what she learns doesn't falsify physicalism. So, cool. Which I think is obviously true. Knowledge argument's a bad argument in that sense. It doesn't really, it brings in so many distracting factors. That's why the zombie argument, even though it's, somewhat uncool to be talking about zombies, it's cleaner, pure version that where the issues are more straightforward, in my opinion. Let's see here. Is Ned Block an identity theorist? Yeah, he is. He didn't used to be, but then he was. So he does think that phenomenal properties are going to be identical to neural properties, like the seeing of red, for example, might be identical to some kind of neural activity in V4, the visual processing area of the brain devoted to color processing. Fun stuff. So yes, he's definitely identity theory. So is John Perry, Chris Hill, I think, is identity theorist. Tom Polgar has defended identity theory. There are a few philosophers who are friendly to the identity theory. And Ned Block has a paper on this where he tries to address this issue, which I think he thinks is the best argument against identity theory, which is the Jack Black objection. Is it Jack Black? No, that's the comedian. Is it Max Black? That'd be hilarious if Jack Black had an objection to the identity theory. I'm sure it would be him on the guitar singing. Anyway, Max Black. Objection to the identity theory that basically, even if they are somehow identical, they have to have distinct properties because you identify them in different ways. To put shorthand it. Okay. Will she independently deduce the correlation between the phenomenological stuff and brain stuff without somebody having to point out the correlation? If you're talking to me, then yes, that's the whole point of the thought experiment, is that you would sort of instantly go, oh yeah. How could she not? She knows everything there is about the experience of red from the inside, how it appears, how it relates to everything else, and then she learns all these facts about the brain. So it would be obvious which states are the ones that correlate with those. It would be just like clear as day. So it seems to me, that's the intuition I have. So hello, reflective journey. Sorry, I'm behind on the comments here. I'm way up here. Opinion on Pittsburgh school. What's that? Do you mean like Brandom and all that stuff? I don't know. I don't know what the Pittsburgh school is. Sorry. I'd have to know more about that. Robert Brandom. Who's the other guy? McDowell? Yeah, I don't know a lot about these guys, to be honest. I should learn more about that stuff. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't really know. So what's 7 minutes long and better watched at 1.5 speed? What was that? I'm not sure where that came in. Justification with a mask on. Exactly. So I think the justification issue, by the way, for in issues of debate, really suffers from kind of been brainwashed by an old paper written by a professor of mine, which I read and I instantly was like, this solves everything. When I was an undergraduate, that was a long time ago. But still, to this day, it persists. That you kind of got to distinguish between internalism and externalism in justification for knowledge. So there's externalism, which says you can be justified by things external to you. And there's internalism, which says that the justification has to be internal. And if you distinguish between beliefs and believers, then you can kind of make sense of this. So beliefs can have external justification, but I myself don't have justification for believing that, even if the belief is justified by something external. Because internalism is true for beliefs that, in the sense of my being justified in holding them. So I sort of do think that that takes care of a lot of stuff. And a lot of the debates, a lot of the tedious Gettier debates and stuff like that can kind of be swept away with that. Thoughts on the work of PGS, the Peter Godfrey Smith. Yeah, he was at the grad center, sadly, right after I left. I mean, I graduated, and then he came, and then he left. So I didn't really get to spend any time with him while he was there, but I definitely like his work and respect his point of view and is sympathetic to his approach. I don't know. I know he's sympathetic to a biological approach. And is he sympathetic to the identity theory? That I don't really know. Yeah, I might have to look into some. Might have to watch a talk or two of his to find out. It's a good question. I don't know. Let's see. I'm slowly catching up here. You guys are fast typers. So it was interesting. I'm wondering how can there be justification for an emotive expression? Yeah. So I mean, emotions. I don't. Well, could they be cognitive? I don't know. Yes, it depends on what you mean by emotions. I have a paper with Joseph Ledoux where we argue that the experience of emotions could be a cognitive state, but I don't think you need that to make this work. Whatever emotions are, they're feelings, I would say. Not everyone agrees with that, but I have a flat-footed view about that. So can feelings be justified? Yeah, I think that you can justify them in terms of appropriateness. Like if you're laughing at someone in pain, if someone hurts themselves and you laugh, and I don't mean like in a funny way. But because someone sustained serious injury in a non-funny way. So I think that you can make sense of this idea that what really gets a truth value on my particular view of this. I mean, you asked, so this is sort of esoteric to me. But according to me, when you say X is wrong, you're sort of saying boo X or X, or I would say morally condemn X. And also have the belief that that's the correct way, that you should feel, the way one ought to feel about the thing in question. And then that belief that you ought to have this emotional reaction, that is the correct one, that one can have a truth value. So my favorite example comes from Monty Python, since I'm a big Monty Python, or at least I was. I don't know if I still am, since I haven't watched any of that stuff in 100 million years, but I was a big fan of The Life of Brian. There was a point in time where we didn't have a TV, but we had a VCR and a TV, but not cable. I mean, we had a TV, but not like hooked up to anything. So we only had one VHS cassette tape of The Life of Brian, and we just would always play it constantly. So I sort of know that movie by heart, but there are many interesting things in Monty Python movies. Anyway, so I'm thinking about the rabbit example where they come to this pit of bones, and there's a cave, and everyone dives down behind the rocks in fear. And you're like, watch out for that beast or whatever. And then they look over, and it's this little bunny. And everyone's cowering in fear, and the guy's like, why are you afraid of the rabbit? So now these guys are afraid. This guy takes their fear to be inappropriate because the bunny seems harmless. And I think that when you have fear like this, you would say that emotion is appropriate when the thing is a threat to you, because the emotion indicates threat in some sense. So this thing didn't look like a threat. The person thought it was inappropriate. Turns out the thing was a threat, leaped for the neck, and all the funny stuff happened. So it was appropriate to fear that thing. That was the correct response, emotional response. Not just hiding, which was also appropriate, but it was the emotional response, which I think is justified. So I think that you can be fully non-cognitivist about the emotional response. And then in the speech act where you say X is wrong, what you're doing is expressing the emotion, like your emotional response is like, that's terrible morally, which I think is a specific kind of moral feeling, by the way. It's not just, it's like, ich, but it's a moral ich. And then also the belief that that's the correct way to respond. That's the appropriate emotion to have. So people, where they'll disagree mostly is whether they think like that's the way the speech act that you're expressing works, but also whether you really can have appropriate emotional responses. I think it's kind of obvious that the emotions, that you should be embarrassed at certain things and not other things, that it's appropriate to be feel fear of certain things and not other things. So to me, that makes sense, but I don't know. I wrote my dissertation on this stuff, and then I never really did anything with it. I finished my dissertation, and then I was like, well, that's cool. And then I started doing stuff on the higher order theory of consciousness, mostly because I got sucked into a debate about that. But probably I should go back and work that stuff out, because I haven't thought about it in, I guess, how long has it been? Since 2008. A long time ago. Yeah, so I was specifically interested in trying to have a version of, because I don't know, from my point of view, when I learned about emotivism, like as an undergrad, I mean, just personally, like from my point of view, I was in my philosophy class learning about the theories of ethics and so forth, and when they talk about emotivism, I was like, this is obviously true. Like when you say X is wrong, you're saying blech X, and they were like, yeah, so therefore you have to be a relativist, and you can and I was like, no, but so this is a view that I've kind of like always had. And then it just always stuck with me. And then as I kind of went through grad school, I was like, no one has said this. And yet all these people are debating this. So that's why I wrote it on that. But turns out I was scooped by this guy named Blackstone, who in the 50s kind of had a view almost exactly like this, but no one paid attention to it. So I don't know what, for whatever reason. I mean, he talked about motivating and justifying reasons. So it's slightly different, I guess, than my way of putting it. But for the Blackstone view, you can have a motivating reason, which is a reason that gets you to do something, and then a justifying reason, which is a reason that it justifies your emotional response or whatever. And he thinks they come apart. So the motivating reason is the emotional component. That's the thing that gets you to act in a certain way, according to this view. And then there's the justifying component, which is the thing that justifies why you should have that emotional response. Yeah. So yeah, panegyricalism. Yeah, so that's Goss' view. Yeah, so, cool. I'm all for that sort of stuff. But does taste like cinnamon. However, I don't. My problem with all of this stuff always is just that people take themselves so seriously, and then come up with these very radical theories about how the world would have to be, and then turn around and treat kind of ordinary theories as very radical. It seems very strange to me that people take their intuitions this seriously when we have all of these counterexamples. Yeah, I see there's a lot of interesting questions here. So, someone's asking me about cognitive phenomenology. I'm a big fan of cognitive phenomenology. So I was always surprised when people denied that there's any such thing as cognitive phenomenology, like that there's something that is like to think thoughts or to do cognitive things, generally speaking. So, people say, well, it's all just sensory stuff, and then you can't tell. And I think, okay, so that's interesting. But I don't know. I find myself convinced by the view that there is cognitive phenomenology. I even wrote a paper on this. I have one paper on this called The Quality of Conviction, where I try to give my account of why I think this is overlooked a lot. And my basic idea was this. So when you think, so here's one argument you hear. You think 1 plus 1 is 2, and then you think J. Edgar Hoover was head of the FBI, and you don't notice that they feel any differently. But you look at red and you look at green, and you do notice that they feel differently. One feels like red, one feels like green. So clearly there's no phenomenology of the thought, because we don't have different phenomenologies for different thoughts. So my thinking was, well, what if the phenomenology is associated with the mental attitude, not with the content? So that what's in common between 1 plus 1 is 2 and J. Edgar Hoover being head of the FBI is kind of certainty that one feels towards them. They seem to have this quality of convinced, like they seem true. So I think what it is to believe something is to have that kind of "it seems true to me" feeling consciously or not, but for that to be there. And what it is to desire is to have a different feeling towards the content. So you could want J. Edgar Hoover to have been head of the FBI because you made a bet. That's different than believing that he was head of the FBI. And that's different than wondering whether he was head of the FBI. Well, I guess I have another paper on this too that I wrote with Pete Mandic. I forgot about that one, but that was sort of specifically on the higher order theory and how I think it entails this. But anyway, so yes, I think cognitive phenomenology is a type of phenomenology, a type of experience, and I'm convinced by all the normal stuff. Like there's something that it's like to understand sentences in your language that's different from understanding sentences in different languages. And also, I think that we can know by introspection whether we're thinking or wondering or doubting, and that requires that we pick out something phenomenal, I would say, although people can debate that. So, anyway, so what I was trying to explain then was why people would say, oh, these two beliefs, there's no change when I go from 1 plus 1 to 2 and this other one. And my thought was, well, they both have the same level. You believe them at the same level. They both seem obviously true, like clearly true. 1 plus 1 is 2, and this fact about history. So, however, you can see where there's gradations of them, where you just barely believe something, you're not sure if you should believe something, or you believe something, like where you walk out on the glass floor in a big tall building, you believe that the floor is solid, but also like you're very nervous. So I think that also certain psychiatric disorders, maybe you could make sense of this, where people have delusional states where they say they believe the things, like that their head is filled with cotton or there's a squirrel in there, but they don't really believe it because they're not acting on it. They're not like digging the squirrel out or trying to eat the cotton candy. So they don't really feel convinced of it, I would say. That's one interpretation. There's even some like ways. I read this book that was at the time I found very convincing, which was about schizophrenia and whether or not it was a disorder of experience or rationality. So are these in these cases where a person says something very strange like I'm dead, and then but they're eating food, and you say, that's interesting. Like, you're dead. They're like, yes, my body's rotting. I'm all rotten inside. You say, okay, but your pizza tastes good. Yes, no. So they're eating food but claiming they're rotten inside. Seems like clearly something fishy is going on. And so one interpretation of that is that they have contradictory beliefs, that they're irrational, that they literally believe that they are dead, and also that they are not dead. Rationality. But a different interpretation of that is that they are very much not irrational, but are having a strange experience, which they are trying to interpret or make sense of. So rather than believing something contradictory, they could be having this very strange experience of feeling like something is off inside, and not knowing how else to put that. So they're trying to interpret this experience, or rather than merely having ordinary experience and being confused about it, being irrational. So that got me to thinking that, maybe what's going on in some of these cases is that the beliefs that they have, they just lack this experiential quality. They seem very strange, like the sense of, like, when you go outside and you're like, get lost all of a sudden, you're on your own block. You're like, which way do I go? You get turned around. Things seem unfamiliar until suddenly they seem familiar. So maybe something like that is going. So you have this very strange experience, in other words, is what I'm saying. And so, like, you suddenly say, is that my corner? Is that on the right block? I thought I was over here, but now maybe, I don't know. Every block starts to look the same after a while. Anyway, so I do think that's the case, but I'd be careful even, about using the word qualia for the simple fact that qualia is a loaded term which often carries with it some baggage. But I would certainly say that they are phenomenal properties of phenomenally conscious individuals. Yeah, I would. And what do I think qualia are? Are they non-representational or appearance properties, etc.? So I don't think we know, if you mean like what are they ultimately. I don't think we know if representationalism is true or if sense data theory is false. I think we have arguments that point in certain directions, but I don't think we can say that we know. My own view is kind of, I'm torn between a representationalist view and a non-representationalist view, which kind of splits orthogonally with physical versus non-physical views. So my most considered view in philosophy is simply that physicalism is not known to be false. That's really the thing I defend the most often, because people think they do know it's false. But I don't really think we know. So if I had to say, are there mental qualities in the sense of non-representational states which are not intentional, don't have accuracy conditions, sort of these internal intrinsic things, the kind of mental paint, mental latex, those sorts of things that people talk about, like Bloch and Papineau. Are there really those things? I don't think we know. Yeah, I don't think we really know. There are some reasons to think that maybe there are, and there's some reasons to think that maybe they aren't. And then even if you think there are, it's not clear whether those things have to be conscious. Could they occur unconsciously? Lots of people get really worked up when you say there could be a pain that's not a conscious pain. But is there really a reason to be worked up? I mean, it could be a pain, really a pain, and you just not be a conscious pain, so you don't feel the pain. Um, Many people find that to be like almost contradictory, whereas I don't. I think you could have a view in which that came out to be true. So I really don't think we know the answers to these questions. This is why, for anyone who's looking for other things to do, I have this discussion from Consciousness Live with this guy Jeff Lee, and I think his views are very interesting. He's a good philosopher, and one of the really amongst the many interesting things that he has to say is this business about, look, we don't know the answers to these questions. We don't know if representationalism is true. We don't know if there are mental qualities. We don't. I mean, I don't think he mentions that one perhaps, but representationalism definitely, and a few others. So when I say that we don't know enough about the science to understand like the mind equaling the brain, I also think we don't know enough about the mind as of yet. So yeah. So look at John saying, I just lost it. John, I know you say we don't have good reason to think physicalism is false. In your view, what reasons do we have to think it is true? I mean, I don't go around thinking that physicalism is true. So I don't know what reasons there are for me. Because my own view is that I don't think of it as true. I think of it as not known to be false, which is good enough for me. And that's really all I care about. So, are there any reasons for thinking that it's true? Well, a lot depends on where you start from. So, a lot of the arguments against physicalism depend on a certain theory of perception, whereby we don't have kind of a direct contact with the external world, but instead have direct contact with experiences and indirect contact with the an indirect contact with the external world. It's a very popular theory of perception amongst certain persons and certain viewpoints, but don't really think it's required that we have that view. And there's other views out there, like representationalism is one of them. So yeah, I'm not really a big defender of physicalism, except I guess the only defense that I would say is that if you think that it's not true, then you would have to give some reason for that. So, are there any reasons that think it's false? And there, I think you just run into the same old problems. But I mean, so as far as just like, is it simpler? I don't know. The business about the causal closure of the physical world, I think, is an important piece of evidence. Making sense of how the mind causes things in the world is something important. But none of those amount to like refutations of dualism. I mean, I feel epiphenomenalism is logically consistent. So, yeah, I don't really think I'm a good person to answer this question. I don't know if there are any good reasons to think that physicalism is true. It's one of the views. Now, do I think that that's the one that's sort of ahead of the other ones, where that's different than being true, like that's being my personal favorite? By the way, if anyone's out there and if you are noticing that Eminem has suddenly drop the Diss album towards Benzino, then I will immediately end the stream and go listen to that. So please keep an ear out for that, guys. Yeah, so I'm not really thinking that is true. But then after you get past that initial question, you might wonder, are there any reasons for preferring it? I'm happy not knowing things. I don't, like I already said, I'm not really a big knowledge person. I'm more interested in having true beliefs, and you might not know if they're true. So that's great. Externalism for the win. But I do think there are reasons for thinking that physicalism is better than other views, like idealism and panpsychism and substance dualism. So while I don't think that there are reasons for thinking it's true, I think that there are reasons for me preferring it. Would those count as reasons for you to prefer it? I don't know. But yeah, so what then are the reasons for preferring it? Well, we've already been over a lot of them. There's the causal closure of the physical, which is an empirical discovery. There is the non-discovery of any kind of missing sequence in the cause-effect sequence of what's going on in the brain. There is the success of other naturalistic theories of things which people thought couldn't be explained, which then were explained. And then so ultimately all of this boils down to the question of how much weight we should give our personal inability to understand how physicalism could be true. So, I think that you wouldn't really you have any reason to think, to be motivated personally, to look beyond physicalism without being very struck by these conceivability arguments. In which case, I think you should ask yourself, why? And what does that really show in all these things? So, instead, what I find is that many people uncritically think these conceivability arguments just like conclusively demonstrate something. And I don't think that they do. So I guess those would be my reasons for thinking physicalism is has a slight edge above the others. I think I jokingly said with my discussion with Eric the other day that I was, in my view, 75 physicalism, 25 the other views. I don't know if that's exactly how I would put the numbers, but I do think that there is more reason to think that we are mistaken about these a priori intuitions than there is to think that consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality. That's the fundamental issue for me. There's more reason to think we're wrong than there is to think we're right. It's just that simple. For me, it's that simple anyway. So, and I get all the non-physicalist intuitions. Remember, I started out sort of as accepting conceivability arguments. It's just that I get the intuitions. I just don't know why the intuitions, which are a fact about me, suggest anything about the nature of reality. Okay, so let's see. The obvious non-physical thing Puja says is a feeling. A feeling is an emotion unelicited by physical stimulus. Is it though? Emotions are mere physical responses towards physical stimulus. Feeling is intact. The work of mind. Well, I think a feeling is an emotion, so I'm not really sure what you're trying to say. Do I take a view on the substance versus relation debate? Any thoughts on Ladyman's ontic structural realism? Yeah, I like ontic structural realism, and probably am an ontic structural realist. I definitely buy this argument, which I'm a little late to the party, but someone said Max Black. Good. I'm behind. I'm reading through the comments trying to answer them, so I'm I'm slacking and lagging behind where the comments are. But Ladyman's ontic structural realism. Yeah, I like it. I mean, basically, the idea is what changes in a theory from like Einstein, from Newton to Einstein to whatever comes after is the mathematics of it. Newton's mathematics is not falsified; it's just shown to be a special case. So if you oh, someone's trying to join the Zoom here. Let's let them in and see what they're gonna do. Hello. Hey, that's not the what I wanted. That's how I'm reading the chat. Hello, are you there, guest? John, are you there? I can't hear you. You might be muted.
Cool. You can hear me now.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Cool. Cool.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Cool. Hold on. I'm just putting you on the screen over here. Um,
Cool. Sorry, I feel like I screwed it. Let's
no,
see.
that's fine. I have the link there for people to join. It's not like it's there for you not to join.
Cool. Yeah, figured. Thanks, man.
Okay. So I think I want to turn off that one and keep this one on. I think we're both up there. Um, Other people can feel free to join as well, should they. Did you want to add anything right off the bat, or was there? I didn't really size it right because I don't care. But sorry. Well, I can't fix that. I think so.
No, yeah, I guess I wanted to jump in because as a follow up to where you were kind of going on the reasons to think, reasons to prefer, I guess as you put it, physicalism,
Uh huh.
not to believe it's true. Um,
Cool.
yeah, yeah, and kind of where I guess yeah. I mean, what do you think about the idea that like I guess some of the reasons you put forward for at least maybe preferring it are kind of like the obvious things like causal closure ideas or just the effectiveness of like uh technology that kind of just deals with like physical thing that kind of stuff, but do you not see that as in a way I put it in the chat too but you didn't make it to it, but of kind of begging the question that those entities are like some ontological thing completely wholly apart from experience when we only know of any of that stuff through experience. Like you're probably familiar with that kind of line of thinking. Do you not see
Yeah.
that as kind of begging the question or no? Yeah.
I mean, I see what you said as begging the question. So
Okay.
I don't think that you can start from the idea that experience is somehow ontologically different than the rest of the stuff around us, like water or gold.
Totally agree.
So there is experience, like we have it. I'm not an illusionist. I don't even want to play that game. Like I just think like it's clear that we clearly are conscious, obviously. So there are also tables and chairs. It seems to me I experience things like hardness and solidity and liquidity, and wetness, various physical seeming things, or at least that I can mathematically describe. So from there, we try to give an account of that stuff, and we start using mathematics and so forth and so on. And our experience is part of that. But I don't really see why we get to say that you start with only experience. You start with the world and your experience of it.
Right.
And then it's already a theoretical assumption. This is sort of what I was saying about the theory of perception that one has. That no, that's not the physical world. That's your experience of the physical world. Okay, well, what's the argument for that? It seems like that's the physical world to me. Everyone I've ever met that hasn't studied philosophy says this is the physical world, and they smack you in the head with a coffee cup, or that because that's where we start. So I don't think we start with oh this is experience. We start with this is the world, and I'm in it. And then we start doing our theorizing. So I think we kind of get both at the beginning. which I agree that if you're like, have a certain theory of perception, it's not where you're going to start, which is why I think that's kind of an important issue.
Yeah, heard. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've always kind of had that same. I guess it's the obvious intuition though, but the you know that you perceive like a table as being not this thing on the screen, but like a thing out there in the world. I guess I just yeah. Um, yeah, yeah. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, cool. Thanks for the answer. Yeah, I'll think
Oh
on that
yeah,
for a
no
minute.
problem. I mean, it still doesn't. I mean, I see what you're saying though, and that's why I kind of was
Right.
bringing up this thing about the perception, which is like I think a lot hinges on like what you think the right view of perception is. Um, but I
Right.
think the naive view is not that like the typical way that the idealist argues that all we know is consciousness. I think the naive view is naive realism that the world's out there. There it is. You have to beat people over the head. I mean, to
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
personally, like when I try to explain, like, oh, this table isn't like you tell people that this isn't the real table that you're seeing right now. This is your experience of the table. It takes
Right.
a
Sure. But
lot of work to get them to go, oh, okay. And then you phantom limb pain, and they're like, well, so they
yeah.
don't have an, so they're crazy, right? They're faking it. You're like, no, they really experience the arm, but it's not there. It takes a lot of work to get people to even understand that, let alone to think of that as like the common sense starting point.
Right. Is in a sense though, is it in a sense though, doesn't physicalism have the same issue of, like you said, of doing all this work to convince people, maybe not of the same thing, but of that the real world out there isn't your experience of, because it's like according to physicalism, the real world doesn't have any qualities, right? So isn't that kind of the same issue? Do you see what I mean? Or
Yeah, exactly. So, but that's already assuming a theory of perception. So, if you say the real world doesn't have any qualities, the physical world doesn't have any qualities, then well, you're already denying the naive realist view, which is that the real
right,
world
but
does have those qualities. They're out there. The red is on the object, and maybe you think science has refuted it. I don't know. You have to tell some of the philosophers in Berkeley that
right,
science has
right,
refuted their
right,
view. I don't think they agree. But that doesn't mean they're
right.
right. I'm just saying it's a different theory about how the senses
So
and reality interact. And in order to make this kind of argument work, you have to already start. I think McDowell, someone
totally,
says below McDowell, I think McDowell is a naive realist. He is one of these people, if I'm not wrong. I don't know much about his work. But anyway, so I would say that a lot depends on that starting point.
yeah,
So if you
totally,
really do think, look, this is my experience, and in the real world, there are none of these things. There's no red. There's none of that stuff. Ordinary persons find that view very unattractive.
yeah.
It's very hard for them to take seriously.
Yeah,
So
yeah, but you see a view of physicalism that doesn't have to commit it. Like what would that view be then? Because that right, like if the physical stuff is supposed to be like elementary particles or fields or something, and that's the real structure of the universe, then I don't see how that has anything to do with, like you're saying, the naive, not in a negative sense, but just the everyday view that the
yeah,
world is right? Like how does a physicalist get out of that? Like it almost seems easier to me to get out of that as the idealist, because you get to say, no, this is the world. Like my experience of the world is the world. Experience is such that it's like the thrownness, or like it's not just this like part of the phenomenal quality of it is that it's like I'm embedded in this environment, but
right.
still that's the world. Whereas like the physicalists, to me, it seems like they have the more challenge to explain how, like it's so right. At least my understanding, this might be a wrong understanding of what physicalism is saying, but is that that these abstract mathematical fundamental structural entities are the real world. So that seems totally that seems a big gap from the everyday starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, these you're exactly right, but we have to be careful because, well, I mean, I guess I would put it slightly different. So physicalism is the view that everything is physical or certain things are physical, but then you have to say what that means. So you're assuming a certain answer to that question as being like what physicalism is, and I would say there are other versions of physicalism. I don't know if McDowell is a physicalist or not, but I know some naive realists are physicalists. And it doesn't seem like contradictory to me to conceive of a world where it's physical and there are things like red apples. where those are properties of the apple, like the redness of red. Couldn't that be a property of an apple in the way that it appears to me? I don't see why not.
Wait, isn't that not? I thought that empirically that's what I thought that was like a settled thing, centuries ago. That it was like that quality arises from interaction between our perceptual apparatus and some, I
Well,
guess,
that's the way
colloquial
a
thing.
lot of people would like it to be. Yes. So
Okay, maybe I'm naive and yeah, okay, yeah,
naive realism or direct realism, depending. So if you don't like it, call it naive. If you like it, just call it direct. But direct realism is a view that I don't think has been refuted. It's not as popular as it was. You're right about that. I don't think it's a popular view, but there are respectable people that hold it, and I think it's the way the world certainly seems.
yeah,
Which is, I think, we're agreeing on here, by the way. Which is what we're both agreeing that the world seems like it's right here and has the properties that it does. So then the move is, well, physicalism is trying to deny that in some sense. It's saying the world really isn't that way. And first off, just saying, well, some physicalists don't deny that; they accept that.
mm,
But even if you take the kind of physicalism that you're talking about, where you say, look, the world out there doesn't really have these properties, well, that would be very surprising, I would say. But how does that show that physicalism has a harder time?
sorry, if you take the view that the physicalist view that also accepts direct naive
No, the,
realism.
the the way that you put it. So I was first of all, so
Oh,
I know I was too
oh.
long winded. Sorry about that. But yeah,
No,
so if you
yeah,
even if you accept what you were saying, why would
yeah.
that show what you thought it did?
Well, I guess what I meant is that I feel like if you start with the phys or if we're treating physicalism as implying that the world, yes, it's out there, but it doesn't have qualities because it's some abstract like thing. Like, I mean, I'm not really informed at all on physics, but my uninformed idea is that they're saying it's like some fields, quantum fields, or some subatomic particles. Like that to me seems that totally nothing like whatever, you know, pianos and tables and shit. Like
Yeah.
and so it seems like they have a lot to do. Does that make? Yeah, I guess that's what I
No, it
meant. Yeah,
does. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
But
yeah.
just starting from there, do you disagree? Like, so tables and chairs and shit. Do you think that stuff can be explained just by a physical account of like electrons and particles? So not our
Yeah. I
experience of
guess
it,
so.
but just
Yeah,
like a table or a chair.
yeah. You can account for it. You can describe it in using like quantities and like whatever physics uses
Uh
these
huh.
days.
And
Yeah.
then
I think
so
so.
there'd be nothing once you were done with that. You would just like that would be nothing more to say about the chair or the table. And you could,
Right.
in
Yeah.
principle,
Right. I see what you're
probably do
saying.
that about like our body as well, and the
Right. I
brain,
see what you're saying.
and furthermore.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess. Yeah. Right. Okay. I see what you're saying. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Because it does seem to me though that you're still leaving out like yeah. I guess if your account from starting from those fundamental things somehow included, things like all the phenomenal stuff, then yeah, you could. I guess I have trouble seeing right now exactly how it can include that stuff if it's all supposed to be quantitative things. Um, but that's obviously like a whole, yeah,
Well, that was what I was ranting about earlier. Is that we,
yeah,
we can't see it until we can see it, and
until we can,
then
right.
and so it's like, if Aristotle were sitting around saying, "Look, how could water have parts? Like, what are you talking about? Like, look,
Yeah.
like I just don't see it." And then now we're sitting around going like, "Duh, water's H2O." Like, well,
And you
H2O.
don't
Like,
see you don't see like a big difference between like I know earlier you said the example of like gold too, like of like the case where it's gold and the case where it's like phenomenal like quality, all that. You don't see, to you those kind of seem like, oh yeah, those are about similar things that we need to account for. It's not like one's this totally different type of thing. That's kind of your intuition, at least. Is that?
my intuition is that it certainly seems like it's very different. but I don't
Okay.
know why we should take that intuition so seriously.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So I 100% agree. Like, yeah, it fucking seems very different.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I mean that's what I take to be the real sort of what I take to be real implication of all the knowledge argument and all that stuff is like there's some unique about the way we know about consciousness is not the way we know about other things. It is subjective. It is in the sense knowable for me from here, and that's
Right.
unique. But does that mean it's not like anything? Like that it's so unique that it's fundamental to reality? Some
Yeah.
things are just unique, maybe. So it's not like I think it's not unique or there's nothing special about it or it's very unique and puzzling. Otherwise, smart people wouldn't be doing all this. But how serious should we take that? It's like the parallel postulate. So people thought, had to be that way. In 1,000 years, they tried to deduce the parallel postulate from the other the axioms of geometry, and then they instead accidentally proved non-Euclidean geometry. So it's like, okay. So sometimes it's like, yeah, it just what seems like later is like, how could not these straight lines not be like parallel? Well, it turns out you need to change your assumptions about what space is like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then things change. So we haven't got to that point, but is it really impossible that we could ever get to that point? That's where I think a lot of people want to dig their heels in. It certainly seems that way now, but in light of everything else, it just seems like I wouldn't want to bet on it being that way 1,000 years from now. And
Yeah.
that's a personal
Well, yeah.
bet. It's like
Right.
it could
Right.
turn
Right.
out to
Right.
be. You guys could be right, but my own view is I'm caught between because half the side says, "Oh, it's obvious. You could functionally analyze it." I'm like, doesn't seem like you can. Like I agree with all the kind of anti-physicalist intuitions. I just don't think that they show anything more than that we lack the ability to understand how it could be true if it is.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And I agree. I actually agree about you put it earlier some way like I don't know, just that we shouldn't put so much weight on the conceivability stuff. Yeah, that's never like. Yeah, I remember just like first in first a couple philosophy classes and stuff, and I just never really like clicked. I didn't think, oh, just because we can. Yeah, there's such a disconnect.
Yeah,
Conceivability,
exactly.
I don't put much weight in it either. Yeah, I do agree with that. Yeah, yeah,
And but then that's really when you ask for why people think physicalism is false. That's what it boils down to. Like there's no empirical reason. There's no science. There's no okay. Is there a contradiction? No, there's no contradiction. Okay, so what is it? It's just I
well,
don't see how it could be true. And you go
yeah.
okay,
And you think
but what
to you
else
the
is
hard
there
problem
besides
is
you don't see that it could be true? And then they say zombies and Mary, and then I have my other versions, and then I think we're kind of at a point where we go, all right, let's just do the
so.
science.
So you're saying that the hard problem, all that stuff is just boils down to I just don't see how it could be. That's it. It's just more of
Yeah,
an admission of one's own whatever. Yeah.
exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
the classic argument is, science explains structure and function. Consciousness is not explainable by structure and function.
Yeah.
Therefore, science can't explain consciousness. So the two classic responses are to say, yeah, so what? And to say, hey, wait a minute. And I kind of I go a little bit of both. But the part of me that says, hey, wait a minute, says, what you really should be saying is, it doesn't seem like consciousness can be
Right, right.
explained by structure and function. So, we don't know. And certainly, if you define it conceptually as that which resists explanation by structure and function, then it is obviously so. But the question is like, what's the right concept? I find it just as puzzling as everybody else. But it really, for me, it really boils down to there's no contradiction. So when people say, "Oh, zombies, zombies," I'm like, "Yeah, but what about the zombies? They're not contradictory. There's no P and also not P. There's no Q but also not Q. Like you can't show that, or unless if you could, someone would have. So it's
Hmm.
got to be more just like both of them can't be like really possible. It can't be possible that a duplicate of me would lack consciousness and also that it would have consciousness. That really is a contradiction. So it's got to be something else. And either one of us is wrong, or, you can conceive whatever the hell you want and it doesn't fucking matter, or
Yeah.
something else. But those seem to me to be the options. And it doesn't really seem that, like, you picking a side makes it be that way. But a
Yeah,
lot of people really rant about it. They're like, but zombies, zombies, zombies. It's like, okay, so if you had read about zombies first, would you be yelling zombies, zombies? I mean, you can't. You got to say something about what's contradictory or why what I'm doing wrong when I say I can conceive of this.
yeah,
And the rules of the game say you have to show that it's contradictory because that's what it means not to be conceivable.
yeah. Cool. I don't want to hijack this too much for too long, but yeah, totally. Yeah.
Cool, but before you go, are you a musician?
Oh yeah, yeah. You got a lot of shit back here.
Yeah, what do you play? I mean, what kind of stuff?
Little, yeah, little everything like yeah, rock, alternative rock. Yeah, yeah. I'm mostly like record music and like produce. You know what I mean? And then like have
Yeah.
other people play the shit. And yeah, yeah,
Oh, okay,
totally.
cool,
But
awesome.
I play a little bit of everything though. You know, if what. But yeah, mostly like
Sweet.
that kind of thing. Sweet man. Yeah, cool.
Well, thanks for stopping by. Come back again next time.
Yeah, will do. Yeah, yeah. I've been I love watching you crack yourself up on those react to things like pause it every like 10 seconds
Hey,
and shit.
if I'm not going to laugh at my own jokes, then what's even the point? You know?
It's good, man. Cool. Thanks, man.
Cool. See
Take
you
it
next
easy.
time.
See you, man.
Oops. I didn't mean to do that. Why do I always do that? Realistically, how much? Oh, I'm still doing the Zoom thing. This is what I'm supposed to do. Realistically, I have only a little bit more time, but I do have these times scheduled to do this. Um, oh, so that was John. He was the one asking about the. Someone says, "Do I recognize that they are gods?" No, I don't. I'm kind of old school. No gods, no masters. Okay, so gee, there's too many comments for me now to keep up with. Um, I lost track of where I was in all these. What were you guys arguing about? Do we gain anything if we accept idealism from Nib? Are there new medical, technical, or policy? Yeah, I don't know if that's the right question to ask of the idealist. Honestly, I think what you gain if you're an idealist is that you get to explain consciousness in this way that is understandable to you, which I think is really what we were just talking about a second ago. Um, oh, were people talking about McDowell? Did they tell you whether McDowell is a naive realist or not? Um, I don't know about this knowing when you're in a dream stuff. Have you never pinched yourself in a dream before? I have. It hurts. Man, one of the most messed up dreams I ever had was like I had a dream I was robbing a liquor store, except for that I was also the clerk in the liquor store. And like I had a shotgun and I came in, but I was also standing behind the counter. I guess I had like a point of view of myself from a outside point of view, and I had the gun, and I shot myself with the gun, and I looked down, and suddenly I was the shot person, and I saw the stuff hanging out, and I felt like the pain, and I woke up. So that sucked. Not a good dream. But when people say they can't feel pain in dreams, then I always think about that dream. It really hurt. So it seemed to me that, the pain was real and occurring in the dream. Did I have a stomach ache in real life? I don't know. Like I woke up and my stomach didn't hurt. I don't think that I was having, maybe I was having some kind of issue. Um, yeah, direct realist. Right, but direct realism is, yeah, pretty close. Okay, good. I know, disjunctivism. Disjunctivism always confuses the crap out of me because, like, so there's the red apple, and then later you hallucinate the apple, and then the disjunctivist says that there is something in common between those two. But since the apple isn't there, the thing that has to be in common between those two is like your acquaintance with a property type or something. I saw a talk by McDowell on this. And I don't know if I understood it. I should check some of this stuff out because I was having this argument with some neuroscientists the other day about whether red, there's such a thing as red. And they equate red with like the experience of red. But there's a whole debate about whether there's a red out there. So, um, anyway, so I do think that what you gain if you accept idealism is just this like intelligible explanation. It makes sense. By the way, yeah, I don't know how you exactly get that. This is something I try to press like people like Bernardo and Filikov. Like, don't you get like the exact same kind of problem, like a version of the hard problem, um, on how these things get related to each other, like the combination problem. These things they say, well, it's not this, it's not this different, it's of a different kind. I don't really know that it is, but it does seem. Um, hmm. Yeah. Oh well, someone's coming back over here, so let's see what they're talking about. Hello. Oh, they're connecting to the audio. Don't you know? Okay. Hello, Sebastian. You're muted, maybe, if you're talking. I can't hear you on the Zoom audio. Oh, you can't? Huh. You just chatted to me. But the last person who called in could hear me on the Zoom audio. Looks like Caden has joined. I can hear you on stream, but not on Zoom. Weird. Huh. That is weird.
Oh,
Let's see the
wait, can you hear me, Richard?
yes.
Oh, I can hear you now. I fixed
Okay.
it.
Hey,
How's it going?
pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I wanted to ask you a question about the knowledge argument.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
So, one thing I have been struggling with, or I think I don't fully understand about a certain kind of response to it, is it seems like if you go for, like the Lewis response, that you're gaining knowledge how and not knowledge that, then you're not going to assert that Mary has learned a new kind of like propositional knowledge. But if you go with a phenomenal concept strategy, you are sort of saying that there's a kind of fact that Mary has learned, of a sense that like she's learned, that having a red experience is like this or like that.
Yeah.
And my question is, I don't know how to think about the relationship between that kind of the difference between those two accounts and like an acquaintance hypothesis of what Mary learns. In other words, if you say that she gains a new kind of knowledge, or a new type of knowledge about exactly the same thing, in the sense that she gains like a knowledge by acquaintance with some sensory prototype or some presentation of like red neurons or in her visual cortex. Is Are there different ways to construe that on which she would learn new factual knowledge as well, and on which she wouldn't? Or like, can this be put within the phenomenal concept strategy, or is there a way of separating this out as a third kind of account where you're gaining a non-propositional kind of knowledge similar to the knowledge how account? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Good question, actually. Um, you've thought a lot about the knowledge argument, obviously.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my own view is that the phenomenal concept strategy is a version of the acquaintance strategy. So that what the phenomenal concept strategists, are trying to do is to say what acquaintance is. What acquaintance is, according to them, is to have a certain kind of concept whereby the experience itself plays the conceptual role or whatever, and that's what it means to be acquainted with the experience in some direct way. So
Does
I'm
that
not sure.
reduce? Does that end up reducing like knowledge by acquaintance to just another kind of like propositional knowledge, like a factual kind of knowledge, though, or no?
Um, I think that they, well, does it reduce it to another kind of factual knowledge? Yeah, I think that they think that you get um, a type of knowledge that's insulated from the other facts that you have because of the kind of concept that doesn't have any descriptive content but is just like the experience itself. So by being acquainted with the experience, you can form the concept like this experience, in their view, taking the experience itself in some sense as part of the thought. Um, and that's going to ground your knowledge of this fact that this is what it's like, that what it's like is like this or whatever. Uh, but that the reason why you can't deduce or can't link it to the other stuff is because the concept is like importantly experiential, so it doesn't have, it's just the experience itself.
I see. So it's a new factual kind of knowledge, but the nature of the fact or concept is such that it's an acquaintance, like it is something you acquire by acquaintance, and the acquaintance is essential to it.
Yes.
So you're not going to be able to deduce it a priori from like the microphysical facts or something like that.
Right, exactly, because in order to do that, the concept would have to have some descriptive content according to them, which would link it, but the phenomenal concepts just are basically the experience playing a cognitive role.
When you say it'd have to have descriptive content, what do you mean by that?
Well, it'd have to have some kind of cognitive content or some conceptual content that was going beyond the experience itself. Like so the concept of red that you and I share is the concept of things that are red. So some fire trucks are red, but actually it's not great to paint fire trucks red because they're not visible at night. So that's why a lot of them are yellow. So I don't know if you knew that or not, but now you do. But you probably knew that fire trucks are often red and fire hydrants are often red and blood is often red. So there's a concept of red, but we share where it's descriptive. It's the stuff out, the stuff which causes in us these red experiences. But the phenomenal concept isn't like that. It doesn't, according to the view, doesn't, it's a quotational concept or demonstrative. People have different views about how you actually do this. But like David Papineau, on his view, it's a quote. It's like quoting it. It's like you take the thing and you put quotes around it. In a way, like if you went to a paint store and you said, "I want this color paint," and then you held up a paint chip, and you're like, "This is the color paint I want." And now the information you're conveying is using the very color as a way to represent the thing you're asking for. So that it's now doing double duty, so to speak. It's that color and also now standing for the thing you want or representing the color type. So something like that is their view. Is that when they acquire the phenomenal concept, you now have the experience. You get to quote it or hit it with your demonstrative arrow, like there it is. And now you think your thoughts or whatever, but because it's just the experience, there's no conceptual hooks like caused by or has the function of or these other things which are in the concept that we share, that you and I share. Caused by things out in the environment, has the function of, causing warm thoughts as opposed to cool thoughts. Those things aren't in this phenomenal concept because it's just the experience itself under playing a new function, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that helps. That helps a lot. So maybe just one more follow-up question that I think would help with me understanding this is, if you think about Mary in the room now before she sees red, if you were to give Mary, let's say, like I don't know, let's say you just give Mary information and you say, fire trucks have like, the property being like X, and hydrants have the property of, or sorry, looking like X, I should say, and fire hydrants have the property of looking like Y. And then you asked her to say, let's say you gave her then new, like a set of two new things, and say that had those, that also looked like those things, like two new objects, and you say, can you tell me which of these new things looks like the thing I just told you looks like X or Y? Is she going to be able to do that, or does she need the phenomenal concepts to be able to associate X and Y with new objects then? Um,
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a version of the Mary stuff which is supposed to, maybe unless I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, is kind of trying to get at this, which is by I think her name is Martina Nita Rumlin. I think her paper she wrote is called Mary in the Technicolor Room or something. I forget the actual name of the actual paper, but I could look it up and put it in the comments later. But anyway, so her idea is, so you take the Mary thought experiment, but instead of coming out and showing her the red tomato and saying, look, you put her in a room where there's a kaleidoscope of colors, where it's like a swirling red and yellow and blue, and they're kind of all just mixing around. And so she goes in there and has the color experience, but then according to Nita Rumlin, she's not going to know which is which. She won't be able to know which thing the
right.
red one is as opposed to the blue one, even though she's looking right at it. So according to her, that shows something interesting or important. That it's, well, I don't know. We could talk about that, but I think that maybe this is, first of all, was this kind of getting at what you were talking about, this idea, or?
Yeah, it was.
Okay. So lots of people have the intuition that she's going to not be able to do that. But I kind of wonder, like, why she wouldn't be able to. Because, like, red is more similar to pink than it is to blue. And she knew that already in her room, since she knows all the facts. So she knows that red is more similar to pink than it is to blue. And so forth. And so she should be able to tell by looking at these things which is more similar to pink than it is to blue and so forth. And thereby come to know which one the red one is based on her knowledge of it. So I don't know. I don't share those intuitions, but there are people who debate these things and think that that matters.
If she couldn't do that, what would be the problem for the physicalist?
I know. I forget what the punchline is supposed to be. I think that it shows that she knows what it's like, but doesn't acquire all these abilities and stuff. So she doesn't know which one is red, let's suppose, but she's looking at red, so she's there in the kaleidoscope room and red happens to be swirling in front of her, and she's looking at it, but she doesn't know if it's red or yellow or blue, so she can't imagine or identify, or she could be say, oh, that color again is supposed to be the idea, like you show it to her, she's like, oh, that one again. But like David Lewis in the ability hypothesis, where you were supposed to get all these abilities, like to imagine red, to predict whether you would like it on any given occasion, all sorts of things. So I think the idea is that you kind of, and I share this intuition, by the way. I was just recording this video about Lewis, and this was really coming home to me. Like I share this intuition that these abilities that she gets don't explain what she learns. Or to put it otherwise, that the abilities she gets are because she learns something, because she learns what it's like to see red. So I think that they're trying to disassociate and show that, these come apart. So Lewis's view that knowing what it's like is just having these stuff, they're trying to challenge that.
That makes sense. Yeah, I'm the one who asked you to do your reaction to the rest of that precisely because I wanted to hear you talk about.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so this. I did. Yeah, cool. It was very cool to hear, especially that good discussion at the end.
By the way, does aphantasia like pose a problem for Lewis's hypothesis, because you could know what it's like to see red but not have the ability to like imagine or bring to mind red if you have aphantasia?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. I think part of Lewis's move is that you have these very large set of like folk psychological platitudes of common sense views about the mind, and that what we want to do is try to preserve as many of those as possible, but that we can't preserve all of them. I think it's his actual view that it's impossible to get all of them, but we want to get as many as possible. And so you could make the case that the aphantasia case is like, putting pressure on maybe one or two of those platitudes, but not all of them. I think this is kind of the point about his mad pain and Martian pain and stuff like that. A lot of this stuff I think he thinks is going to work out that way. But also I think it's an open question whether aphantasia, is how to understand it. This is something I was talking about, that Eric Switchable philosopher. If you know Eric's work, it turns out, he thinks that maybe people who think they have vivid imagery are somewhat wrong about that because introspection is not reliable. So I don't know if it's clear to what extent, mental imagery is the way people think it is, or not. But anyway, so even if it were, though, I don't think it would really put pressure on Lewis's view too much, because you might say, okay, look, so maybe you can't imagine it. But like, for instance, I think of myself as someone with aphantasia in the visual domain. Like, I can't picture or imagine images, at least as far as I can tell. But I still can do most of the things that Lewis talks about. Like, I can recognize red when I see it, absolutely. And then when in my dreams even, I think I recognize red. And, can I imagine red? Well, I can't just like call up a picture of red in my mind right now, but I can do a lot of things related to imagining red conceptually. And when people say to imagine things like inverted earth, where, people have the experience of red, but there's green things out there and so on. Okay, so like I think I can imagine those, but not in a pictorial way. I certainly think I'm conceiving of them and sort of running. So I do think that you could get most of the stuff that Lewis wanted, even with aphantasia being true. You're not going to get like some of the stuff. But a lot.
So you
of
just have
that's
to reference
not-
like the other kinds of abilities associated with acquiring redness, other than specifically,
Exactly.
a certain kind of mental imagery, assuming that, like you said, you could have doubts about the character of mental imagery in terms like
Exactly.
aphantasia.
Yeah, and
Can you
even
talk
though I can't picture like a certain red, I can tell you whether like a certain red is I'll like it or not. If it's too, I can but I don't think that's picturing it. I think certain bright reds I don't like. So if I think it's going to be like that, it's going to hurt my eyes, and I
that
prefer
makes
blue.
sense.
So and I know those things even without picturing it. So I do think that you get most of what he wants, even if the mental imagery is not there.
Makes sense. Do you talk about that in your interview with Eric, by the way? Because I haven't
It
finished
comes
it.
up at the end. Someone in the
Okay.
audience asked about aphantasia, and Eric started talking about it, and it was really interesting. Yeah.
Cool.
So it's towards the end. If you want to skip all this stuff, it's like where I was taking questions from the audience.
Gotcha. I know there's someone else in here who wants to ask questions, so I'll shut up for a second and let them let them go. But thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Cool. I'm glad that people are actually coming around. Caden, were you waiting to talk, or are you just hanging out?
Hey, Professor. I would
You can
like
call me
to
Richard
ask,
here if you want to.
yeah, uh, I'd like to ask about the conceivability of zombies.
Okay.
Chalmers has a response in the character of consciousness under section 6, two-dimensional argument against materialism. He says that he denies the conceivability of zombies and zombies. He says that it's not. He says that it's prima facie negatively conceivable that materialism is true, or that zombies are conceivable, but it's not ideally conceivable. So I interpret his response as it's not dialectically justified to say that zombies are conceivable, and he also says that his conceivability of zombies are dialectically justified because of the further expandum intuition. So what were your
Because of
response?
what? Say that. I'm sorry, I missed that last part. Because of.
Oh, he says that the conceivability of zombies are justified because of the further expandum intuition of
The
the hard problem
further
of consciousness.
explanandum to it, intuition.
Yeah, the hard problem. The hard problem.
Yeah. Okay.
And how
Wait. So this is in the character of consciousness, that blue book. I think I have.
yeah,
And he cites me.
yeah, he cites Brown 2010.
But that paper that was in there was published before 2010. But he must. Okay. Anyway, I personally don't think that he gets to say what you just said. To be honest. So, first of all, when I have talked to Chalmers in person, he seems to misunderstand the Chamby argument. or he seems to want to argue for a certain interpretation of it that I don't think you need. So first of all, Stephen Yablo a long time ago argued against Chalmers's view, which at the time they called modal rationalism. This is old school. But modal rationalism is the idea that conceivability entails possibility, that you can know what's possible by conceiving it. Okay, cool. So one response to that very early on from Stephen Yablo was that, well, you can conceive of a necessary being existing like God, and you can conceive of that being not existing. And they both can't be conceivable, so therefore conceivability doesn't entail possibility or something like that. And Chalmers responded to that by saying, well, gee, it's one thing to conceive of a possible world where certain things are true. It's another thing to conceive of like every possible world and things being necessarily or not true, so that we kind of start to lose our grip on what it means to understand, like, can you really conceive of a necessary being existing? Oh, wow. I don't know. I sort of feel like I can conceive of it not existing. But then again, what does that even mean? So now you might think that the Shambi argument is similar, that it sort of like starts from the conceiving of physicalism. But physicalism is a necessary truth. So that would be basically the same problem, right? You would say you're conceiving of the truth of physicalism and therefore something follows, but I don't think that's right. So you're conceiving of one world, not the entire space of possible worlds, and you're not conceiving of anything necessary, I would say, just conceiving of some consciousness being physical. Okay, so Chalmers, his response there, which he says that it's not conceivable. I think what you said, and what I've heard him say before, is that physicalism is prima facie conceivable, but not ideally conceivable. So what that means is that it seems like maybe you can think it's true, but on ideal reflection, you see how it's not true. And then you go, interesting. So ideal reflection, huh? So what are we reflecting on? Oh, zombies. But that's question begging, because you can't prove that Shambis are inconceivable by stipulating that they're inconceivable, which is what you're doing there by calling it ideal. So I would say both of these are prima facie conceivable. And we don't know which of these is ideally conceivable. And that it's really question begging to say that the zombies are the ones which are known to be ideally conceivable. I don't think you get to say that. Like, on the basis of what? Is it known that they are ideally conceivable? Which, what it means to be ideally conceivable, by the way, Caden, is, I'm sure, it means that an ideally rational agent would not find any contradiction there. Which means that an ideally rational agent would find a contradiction in physicalism. Well, I mean, I guess if you think you're an ideal rational agent, then go ahead and say so. But none of us are ideal rational agents. Chalmers is very smart. He's not ideal. He's extremely intelligent. He's not an ideally rational agent. So to say that this is ideally conceivable is just to beg the question in such a massive degree that it like boggles my mind that you can say this with a straight face and say, these are the ones that are ideally conceivable. Because then I just want to say with an even straighter face, no, the Shambis are the ones that are ideally conceivable. They're the ones. And that's dialectically justified, by the way. Whereas the zombies are not dialectically justified. You don't get to say that. Why? Because of Shambis. So in my view, the harder you want to pound the table in this way, then the harder I will pound the table. Because I think the real lesson of this is that you don't get to pound any tables. But I don't know, did you want to... That would be my view about that. Did I say something that you want to respond to or follow up on?
He suggests that, I'm going to quote him. He says that if I am right that CP is a priori, then there's an a priori argument that if P then Q is not necessary, So it's not ideally negatively conceivable that P metaphysically necessitates Q. So I think I interpret this as in your in a conceivable universe where um all microphysics is the same, all consciousness is the same, the beings there can run an argument starting from the premise of of zombies are conceivable and conclude that materialism is false in their world. So, and you can do this for every conceivable world, and therefore, in every conceivable world, materialism is false, and you conclude that it's a priori that materialism is false.
So, well, the quote that you read didn't say any of that stuff as far as I can tell. What it said is that the CP thesis is a priori, which is this conceivability possibility thesis. That there's a kind of, if you think that there's an a priori link between conceivability and possibility, then that would be great. And then the zombie argument is an a priori argument against physicalism, but the Shambi argument is an a priori argument against non-physicalism. So even if you agree that the CP thesis is a priori and important, you don't get to say that zombies are the ideally conceivable ones. I mean, why think that? What reason is there to think that zombies are the ideally conceivable ones and that Shambis are not ideally conceivable?
I I see it as in every conceivable world you can run the structure and dynamics argument, and the biggest justification for that structure argument is just that you can always ask why does consciousness arise from physical processes, and you'll end up with an epistemic gap between consciousness and physical processes, and therefore you can conclude that materialism is false. Uh, sorry, I'll just paraphrase that. I think the biggest difference
But I
between
deny that, Kate. And just hold on one second, because you can't run that argument in every possible world. Not if the Shambi argument is right. In fact, you can't run it in any if zombies are impossible, like I think they are. I mean, there's no coherent zombie world on my view. It's not a coherent possibility. It's actually contradictory, because Shambis are the ideally conceivable ones. So you can run that argument in every possible world, thereby destroying non-physicalism. So I don't think you can just say that you can run this argument in every possible world, therefore dualism. Well, no, I can run my argument in every possible world because it's necessary that consciousness is physical. And the epistemic gap that such that there is would only be a problem if there were really an epistemic gap in the ideal case. And that's question begging to assume that that's the case now. It doesn't. It's not clear at all that we're near enough to know these sorts of things.
I saw in the Consciousness Online conference you did a few years ago, like
Oh, cool!
multiple
Yeah.
times.
Uh-huh.
Thomas asks you which premise of the structure of and then dynamics argument you deny. Is it the structural aspect of P? Is it the non-structural of Q, or is it the structural non-structural gap? Do you have a clear a stand of that? A stand on that?
Wow, you're going deep here. The Consciousness Online. By the way, thank you for mentioning Consciousness Online. If anyone wants to go and check that out, that is still available. I think that was from the first conference. I did 5 of those, and then it got to be too much work, and I stopped doing it. But so Chalmers asked me which of the premises. I mean, that was a long time ago. I forget what exactly he asked me, but do I say that again? I'm sorry.
Which of the 3 premises do you reject? Is it that microphysics is structural, that consciousness is non-structural, or the structural non-structural a priori entailment gap?
I don't know why I have to reject either of those conclusively, to be honest with you. But what I think is that Shambhis are conceivable, and so there must be some way that consciousness could be physical, even if we can't understand how it could be physical. And I think that makes perfect sense. Like, you can imagine, you can conceive of an unknowable truth, a truth that no one could know, in principle even. Some truth that was in principle unknowable. I can conceive of that even without knowing which truth it would be, because then it would be known. So I can't, just the way it's set up, I can, but I still can coherently entertain that scenario. So if the Shambhi thing is really ideally conceivable, and remember, my considered view is at the end of all this, we'll know which one is really conceivable, but we don't know now, so I could end up being wrong. But if it is the Shambhi one, that's the ideally conceivable case, then consciousness would have to be identical to some structural or functional property. And if the CP hypothesis were true, then there would have to be some a priori entailment between that structural or functional property and consciousness. Or, so that could be true. And part of me thinks, okay, sure. Or it could be the case that there is some non-structural or functional property, which we discover on analogy to the field, which was primarily thought as non-physical when it was first introduced, and now has been sort of tamed, so to speak, and is perfectly acceptable in our ontology. So if something like that could happen with some non-mental thing, which would still allow the view to be called physicalism, but if some non-mental, non-structural thing were introduced, what would it be? I don't know, but I certainly am not against that kind of view. So which of those premises do I reject? Well, one, consciousness could be explained possibly by structure and function. And two, it might also be possible that science goes beyond structure and function. So I think I'm open to either one of those. I mean, it's a bit unfair to ask that question. It's like asking Chalmers, like, which is it, panpsychism or dualism? It's like, I don't know. He's got a little bit of a foot in each corner because it's not clear which way he should go. And that's my kind of view about this stuff here. The conceivability of Shambhis suggests one or those options. So I would say I'm open to either. But I don't know what I wrote back then. I'd have to go back and read it.
Yeah, I think you suggested something similar.
Okay.
I think it's one of my last questions.
Okay.
I think Chalmers will ultimately respond with something like, he gives reasons to reject type A materialism. So because of those reasons, like the heart problem, we should accept that consciousness is non-structural. Will you apply your Shambhi's objection to that already?
I mean, I'm not a super big fan of type A physicalism. To be honest, I had to be beaten over the head by many smart people for many years before I finally came to be like, okay, maybe some kind of type A physicalism that's not totally Looney Tunes could be worked out. But I just don't really see how you're going to be able to define mental terms in non-mental terms, like definitionally, which I think type A physicalism kind of requires. So, or at least that you could know, or I don't know. So it's very difficult in this area. But I mean, the view of mine has always been to tend towards type B and or type C. But I don't really see why, if type A physicalism wasn't true, why that would mean that some kind of structuralism wasn't true. I mean, I get how a certain kind of structural view wouldn't be true, because if they're not, you can't functionally define these things. That is a kind of structure, like the functional definition. So I get that, but structure is like, a larger word which is taken to indicate like how the thing is built, or yeah, those kinds of things. I mean, it's more than just like definitional structure. But maybe I'm misinterpreting what your question was. I'm sorry.
As in, I think you're sympathetic to saying that type A is false, and that consciousness is non-structural. Are you sympathetic?
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by structural. So I'm sympathetic to saying type A is false if what you mean is like you can give a definition of consciousness in terms of some function that it plays. Very skeptical of that. Some days. Other days I'm like, okay, so I finally have, like I said, kind of worked my way into thinking maybe it's not completely illusions. But yeah, it's not my preferred view. I don't really like the view. But I don't know why you're linking type A with structure.
Oh, I mean I mean structural as in like Thorian alters and Daniel Stolzer sense,
Okay.
like phenomenal truths are a priori equivalent to structural truths, to truths that only use structural or dynamic terms.
Well, dynamic
So
A, so you
it's
added
not
that, but that was never before. Okay.
like it's not analytic, but a priori equivalence. So we use a priori equivalence for the premise of saying that consciousness is neither structural nor dynamic.
Yeah, I guess I'm not really seeing the art. I mean, so structural. I'm against any kind of view which wants to say that Mary could know what it's like to see red inside her room. And I think the type A people have to say that she could. But that doesn't mean that you can't explain consciousness in terms of some structural feature of the brain. I might be misunderstanding the term that Stoljar is using here, because I'm familiar with that stuff, but it's been a while since I actually have been like fully. So I might have to reread some Stoljar to really address what you're saying, Kaden. To be honest with you, because I know he has this distinction between like the two different kinds of physical facts, and I thought that kind of by structural, what he meant was like, you know, the stuff ordinary physics talks about, and then the other stuff is like, you know, what the pan-qualityists and Russellian monists and those guys talk about. But if you just mean, like when I say structure, what I tend to mean is like the stuff that you can capture with equations, that the mathematical structure of it in terms of the formal relations between the thing, or the way that it's built, so that, you know, me and a computer are structurally different, because even though we compute information, because I use calcium ion channels and it doesn't. But if there's some more specialized notion of structure that you mean to evoke, then I have to revisit it.
I think all Chalmers needs to say is that there's good reason to believe that zombies are conceivable because of it's intuitively justified that there's a hard problem, as in how do I paraphrase that? It will be do it. Oh, I think he'll just say that structure and dynamics does not explain consciousness, but you already don't lean towards that.
Yeah. You know, the last time I had Chalmers on my Consciousness Live podcast, we didn't talk about this stuff at all, because he had his new book Reality Plus out, and he was like, let's not relive it. We don't want. What did he say? He made a joke. He's like, the 90s called, they want their thought experiment back or something. So when I tried to bring this stuff up. But then I bothered him by email, and I said, look, you got to come on and talk about zombies and zombies because should be settled once and for all. No, I didn't say it that way, but I was like, come on. And he said, okay. So I think maybe I will try to have him come back on and educate me on this, or vice versa, depending on how it works out. But I do think that the one thing I believe is that this hasn't been addressed enough, the zombie stuff. So I do wish people would say something about it instead of just assuming that they don't have to. So at least I'm glad that you brought it up, Kate, and I really appreciate it. I hate to break this conversation off because I really am enjoying it, but it's after 3, and I hear the kids are home from the bus already running around causing havoc. So I am going to have to go ahead and get off the stream here. But I'm going to be doing this regularly, so I appreciate you guys coming around, and keep at it if you want to keep coming back. And I really appreciate the Bring Up Consciousness Online and how thoughtful your questions and comments of every person in the chat, excepting the one who thinks they may be God, perhaps. But to everyone else, I really do appreciate it. It's great fun to connect with you guys.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting.
Yeah, no worries. So I'll